From Wakefield, it's the Nolan Car Night Show, inviting you to join Nolan and his guest this week, Kim Kalunian, to the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the show. I hope you've enjoyed the last week's episode, because I certainly have, and I guess my guest has enjoyed some that she's seen as well. Of course, as they always say with the regular preamble, subscribe, comment, Charlotte Fun, Jessica's down the line. We really want this to blow up, and when my guest gets inducted into the Broadcasters Hall of Fame, I'm sure in the near future, it's like, holy shit, part of my language, but I should subscribe. So all that fun, Jess, follow on social media. I never get it correct, names, which I'll get later down around. Nevertheless, down and ready for my intro for this amazing guest. Rearing originally in Rhode Island, my guest this week has the distinction of not only representing quality reporting, but also playing a part in a momentous occasion in our nation's capital. When she's not at home, resembling the likes of Julia Child with her ability to create tantalizing, tremendous, tasty treats, or chasing around a four-legged friend, you may find her on the front line of Southern New England news as one of this generation's premier journalists. I am immensely honored to be joined this week by Little Rhodey's own Kim Kalunian this week as our guest. Kim, how are you?
Nolan, what an introduction. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, of course, this is always a treat. It's always a fantastic but also interesting thing to watch people on the news that you admire and say, wouldn't it be cool to talk to these people, even if they don't think that they're some well-known person. But at the end of the day, for someone from Rhode Island, it's always a treat to talk to celebrities, regardless of how you want to define that.
Right back at you, Nolan. Right back at you.
I appreciate the kind remarks, but I don't know if I can agree. Nevertheless, begin with how I sort of talk with this. Of course, your field in particular, the last few years has gone through a lot of interesting moments, but now, of course, you're back in the mainstay of things. Looking back on it this year, of course, you've been at WPRI 12 for almost 10 years now. So for you to not have to do something like this professionally, or 6 feet apart. I know when you spoke to Governor McKee when he took over, when Raimondo left, you were wearing masks and you're 6 feet apart out in the snow. So for you, to be back in the swing of things this long, what's it been like?
Yeah, it feels good. It feels good to be back to normalcy. I think everyone was a little scared, quite frankly, when the COVID pandemic first came upon us and we had all these regulations in place. All of a sudden, you can't shake someone's hand or give them a hug. I'm a hugger, so it was really hard. And then the masks, I think, affected the way a lot of us communicate, facial expressions, and all of that. So it's nice to know that we're all safe again. Of course, COVID is still with us, but not in the way that it was just a short time ago, in the grand scheme of things when you think about it. So it feels really good to be back in the studio, to be able to interview people like we used to face, not having to worry about that 6 feet of separation. And, we're on Zoom here, which is great. I think it's been helpful in some ways because it's really opened up the technology aspect of things and how we can connect with people. And that was wonderful because now we do a lot of live Zoom interviews still on the news with people who we wouldn't have been able to talk to in that way just a few years ago. So there's that silver lining, but in person, nothing beats it. So it's great to be back and do things the old school way again.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure, and this is sort of the next part as well. This time also, I'm sure, has given you the opportunity to really appreciate what you had being the small things, but also the fact that during the last few years, your family has grown itself, and that gives you another avenue to sort of acclimate to this world with all these different other things on top of you that you're juggling. But I'm curious, during the last 3 years, hopefully we've all been having the time to reflect and learn things about ourselves. So what's Kim learned about herself that she didn't know prior?
Gosh, that is such a good question. What have I learned about myself that I didn't know prior? I think I took a lot of things for granted, right? Maybe we all did. Just a simple trip to the grocery store. I will never forget going to the store right around the time everything started to shut down, before masks and all of that, because that did come a little bit later. And I used to go grocery shopping as a way to sort of, I don't know, recharge, just wander the aisles aimlessly and check out the new snack food and what I wanted to buy, because as you sort of mentioned, food is my happy place, my happy thing. And I went into the store and the shelves were bare because people had they were scared. They didn't know how long we were going to be cooped up in our homes and what that meant and how much supplies they should stock up on. And that was like a really unsettling feeling. What is the world going to be like, for, at the time, I think we said it was a 2-week shutdown, and then it ended up being months and months. So it was just like this fear of the unknown. But Yeah, I think I learned that I had sort of taken a lot for granted. And I think the pandemic was a humbling experience that made me appreciate the little things a lot more, our health, our safety, how easily accessible certain things are. And I'm glad that life is back to a little bit more of what we were used to before the pandemic.
I want to start like this, then actually begin the real conversation like this. And a while ago, when I had a former colleague of yours, now former colleague Maury, on, he sort of talked about his interest in sports broadcasting by growing up with his grandfather who could not see, and he was with the games, but that way, and sort of found his love for that area in life. So for you, a young Kim in Rhode Island, how did she find that she had a calling or passion for what she does now, but also that her skills might have been a little bit more advanced or faster paced than others her age?
Yeah, so of course we miss Maury terribly already. He's been gone for just a few weeks, but he has an amazing story. That story of him and his grandfather, that's just really, really special. I grew up not thinking I would do this, what I'm doing today. I was into dancing, singing, acting, musical theater. I was a performer and started, taking dance lessons when I was 2 years old, stuff like that. So always was drawn to the stage. Surprise, surprise, I suppose. So I liked being, I don't want to say the center of attention, but I did like that aspect of having a crowd to talk to.
Sure.
So that was something that I guess I was sort of born with. But then as I got older, I realized I liked storytelling really in any form, whether it was doing a play or a musical or doing what I do now, telling people the facts, the reality of what's happening around them in their communities. So as I got a little bit older and continued to do theater throughout, my adult years, I got bitten by the journalism bug during an internship at the Warwick Beacon with John Howell, the amazing editor and publisher there, and did that internship when I was a senior in high school and realized I had this sort of front row seat to history. And not only history, but what was happening in my own backyard.
Sure.
As you mentioned, I'm from Rhode Island. I'm a Warwick native. So it was really special having that kind of access to, what was the news, what was going on in my community. And I realized that I had a passion for that. And so I sort of married my love for current events and reporting and asking questions and my curiosity with my love of performing and storytelling. And here we are in television news.
I want to talk about the work beacon, because I know you got your start in radio for WPRO as well as some of the other local city and town papers throughout the state, Johnston, Warwick, and what was
Cranston. Yeah,
Cranston,
so the
yeah,
Johnston
Cranston.
Sunrise, Cranston Herald, and Warwick Beacon are all sort of under the same umbrella.
What I wanted to ask about that is that, of course, now you're on the 4 and 5:30 team at WPRA 12, but I'm curious on that aspect. What was it about those two different mediums of journalism that got you interested, but then also led to you now switching to this sort of medium?
Yeah, so I think the reason I started out at the Warwick Beacon in newspapers was simply because that was my hometown paper.
Sure.
And I wanted to do something different we had to do a senior project at Moses Brown, where I went to high school. And I wanted to do something outside of my comfort zone. I was thinking of doing something theatrical, but I thought, I've done so much in the theater. Let me try and do something different. And my original pitch to John was I can write theater reviews for the paper. I don't think I wrote a single theater review for the newspaper, but I learned a lot about how to report and become a journalist, how to ask questions, how to write an AP style, what it meant to lay out a newspaper, all of these things that were very much outside of my comfort zone. So so I went from that, and as you mentioned, to WPRO radio, because I knew I wanted to transition from newspapers and writing, which I loved, to broadcast, because it sort of fit my skill set as someone who had spent so many years working on presentation and public speaking. I knew I wanted to sort of transition that way if I could.
Sure.
So I went to WPRO radio initially as a web writer, and then one day the news anchor lost their voice and they said, "Can you read the news?" And I thought, yes. And listening back to that now is really painful, but I did it. And, here we are today. But that was sort of my journey from, how I got involved with the newspapers in my own hometown to sort of where I am today. And I mean, I still get to cover my hometown of Warwick.
Sure.
I live in East Providence now. So it's great. I think it's really special when you grow up watching a station and then get to work at the station with some of the people that you've grew up watching. And like I said, you get to report on your own home state, which is extra, extra special.
Well, it always makes it more rewarding, I'm sure. I'm curious, looking back on it though, if you could, would you have started, instead of doing radio and print journalism, would you have started doing broadcast like you're doing now? Or do you think that was your, not only say only option, but the option at the time that was perfect for you to then lead to this?
Yeah, 100%. I would not change my path. And I think it's because, I didn't go to school for this. I really learned by doing and through internships and on the job training. I have had some incredible mentors along the way who have taken a really big chance on me and have given me incredible opportunities and taught me a lot. And I will say having the foundation in newspapers and in radio, I think has made me a better reporter, has made me a better television journalist because of that past experience that I've had. And I got to learn about the different mediums. I mean, when I see my colleagues from the newspapers or from the radio station out in the field, we have that camaraderie because I know what their day looks like too. And so, yeah, I don't think I would have changed anything about it. And also, frankly, it was probably the only path for me in order to be able to continue to live and work in my home state the whole time. A lot of times you see people who graduate from college and then they go and work in a smaller market somewhere, or maybe several smaller markets and work their way back to Rhode Island. I was so blessed to be able to stay here because of the path that I took with newspapers, radio, and then TV.
Well, you mentioned the quality of your performance as a reporter, which of course is top tier at WPRI 12. But I'm interested, talking about that and comparing, although I'm sure you don't compare yourself to others a whole heck of a lot because you want to be your own journalist. But do you think in the long run that and what you learned from radio and through writing print journalism helped you if you didn't take that path and you just went through the regular broadcast route?
Oh, yeah, I definitely think it helped me. I was just chatting the other day at the Rhode Island Radio and TV Hall of Fame dinner with the news director over at WPRO, Bill Haberman, who I would count as one of my mentors. And I said to him, you taught me so much when I was so young, not just about how to cover a story, but what other juice can you sort of squeeze out of the story that you're at? Who's at the event that you're covering? Who can you ask a question that's unrelated and get the next headline of the day out of that person who's standing in front of you for a completely unrelated reason? Stuff like that I learned in these newsrooms from various mentors that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I had the opportunity to intern at Rhode Island Public Radio as well and learn from some of the masters over there like Scott McKay and Ian Donis, Flo Jonick, who's out of the business now. But just some incredible people who have come into my life along the way. Steve Clampkin over at WPRO Radio, who have just been doing this and doing it so well for so many years, who have imparted their knowledge to me, luckily, because I got to work alongside them.
I want to, mentioning the field of broadcast journalism, like acting or things of that nature, maybe as a musician as well, you're dealt with a lot of heat from the viewers and the people tuning in and dealing with what they say in their opinions and that they think are much more superior than your own. So I'm curious, coming from a print world and radio world, how do you remember reacting to that stuff early on in your career compared to nowadays when you probably just let it wash right off, you not even pay attention?
Listen, it still hurts when someone says something nasty to you, whether it's via email or, on social media. It still hurts. We see those things. We read the emails. We're real people. But I think, and you sort of touched on this, my background in performing arts, there's a lot of rejection there. And there's a lot of criticism there, especially, in the performance world, you get a lot of tough feedback. You're putting your person out there, your voice, your dancing ability, your acting ability, your physical self. And you hear a lot of feedback, good or bad, in the audition room, in the rehearsal hall. So I had sort of gotten conditioned to that. It's funny though, the other day I had a Facebook memory pop up and it was from my time at the Beacon. And it said, "Oh, I just got my first piece of hate mail." And Nolan, I can't tell you what it said because I don't remember and I didn't say it in the post. But I thought to myself, well, the first of many. And it's just sort of part of the business, right?
Sure.
And you do want to be open to feedback. Of course, I want to hear what the viewers have to say because it helps inform the job that I do and how I'm going to approach it tomorrow.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes you have to take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes people are, like I said, it can be a little hurtful.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, you try and respect people's opinions and you try and process it and not let it hopefully ruin your day and
Sure.
get up and do it all again tomorrow.
Well, you want to leave the business in a retirement scenario, not in a business of it's too critical in terms of the people to yourself. And there's an aspect of saying, oh, this person speaks too fast or too quiet, and saying, oh, they can't do their job to save their life or whatever. There's a difference between that. Speaking of WPRI 12 and a place you've been, as I mentioned, nearly a decade, whether it's at your station or at some of the competing stations in Rhode Island, there's a lot of people that have been there for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, maybe 40. I can't think of anybody for 40. But people who've been there for many years, that shows not just their ability as a journalist, but also the trust that the station has in that person. So I'm curious, in your aspect, what does it say about your performance as a journalist, but also WPRI and the upper staff opinion on you as a employee as well?
Well, I am grateful to be here every single day, and I'm grateful to my bosses, my news director, my general manager, who have entrusted me with this job every day to talk to the people of Rhode Island at 4 and 5:30. It's a blessing to be able to do it, like I said, in my home state. So, and I think that matters to the viewers. I think they like knowing that I'm committed to Rhode Island and
Yeah.
I've been here for my whole life and I don't have any plans to leave. And I think that's relatable for people. And I think our bosses recognize that and they want people to stick around. We're a little bit like a family.
Sure.
So many of us, as you mentioned, have been here for a long time. When you say I've been here close to 10 years, my brain sort of explodes because, yeah, it's going to be 8. And that's longer than I expected. I mean,
Sure.
I'm so grateful to be here. It's just crazy how time flies. But yeah, I mean, Mike Montecalvo has been here, Tony Petracca,
Yeah.
Patrick Little, Danielle North, who just left the industry a few months ago. They had been here for so many years.
Yeah.
TJ Del Santo. We've got a great institution here, and these people who work here and live here really value the
Sure.
community and they really, I think no one takes for granted in this building that we get to do what we do every day. It feels really special.
Well, it tells you the uniqueness of the profession, seeing as in the broadcast field, it's such a turnover heavy world, especially the last few years in Rhode Island, where people are leaving for various different reasons, of course, but to stay around as long as one has is a magnificent thing. I mentioned it in the intro for those tuning in of a national government level in our nation's capital. In 2017, my guest was involved with a pretty big milestone and achievement on the national scene in terms of broadcast media. In 2017, you were the first news reporter to ask the first question for those who aren't in the White House press room in a press briefing during the Trump administration with Sean Spicer. Tell me sort of about that experience. Of course, you would never be able to predict it, but in the moment, a nerve-wracking thing. What was that like, and how much did you understand the gravity of that achievement?
Yeah, I was really nervous. Really, really nervous. So this was the Skype Seats program where they allowed for the first time ever, like you said, reporters from various parts of the country to Skype in at the time, which was this sort of novel idea. Of course, now we're
Yeah.
on Zoom all the time, right? But Skype was this, new idea to allow people outside the White House briefing room, outside the White House press corps to ask questions of the White House press secretary that impacted their viewership in their home markets, which I thought was a really cool idea. It's since gone away. But yes, I was very nervous and there was a lot of preparation that went into it. I got to ask one question no follow-ups. I was the first one ever. So I think the first words out of my mouth, the first question technically was, can you hear me? Okay. But then I asked, my prepared question. And it was very nerve-wracking. Talk about response on a national level from people who wanted to criticize the question, how I asked it, what topic I chose, the fact that I didn't ask a follow-up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. An amazing, incredible experience. So glad I got to do it. And I will never forget getting that phone call from the White House saying, hey, we've got this idea. Is this something that you would want to do? And I couldn't say yes quickly enough. And of course, the station jumped in to support me and made sure that our setup was looking great, and the connectivity was there, and it was a super cool, super special experience that I will certainly never forget.
Well, I'm sure you and several and Shannon were head banging to some Motorhead beforehand to get yourself psyched up for that. I know that's for a sure thing. Now, you mentioned, and we've talked about it a few times briefly, your prior life to the journalism world of arts and entertainment and acting and so forth. And of course, in your field, I'm sure, like any other field, fine balance of separating work life from personal life, but also not focusing one on the other. And I'm sure you have this fine line, as I mentioned, of baking and cooking and all that stuff, and acting in this world. How important is it not just to you to have that separation, that outside stuff to keep occupied, but also for a journalist in general to have that?
Yeah, I think it's important to have a work-life balance no matter what you're doing, because I think especially in this industry, it can become a 24-hour, 7-day a week enterprise that, I think you talk to anyone who's truly invested in being a reporter, you're constantly plugged in, you're constantly scrolling Twitter, texting people, checking your email. I'm guilty of that. Not so much as I used to be, because as you mentioned, I'm a mom now, so I've got my little toddler to chase around too. But it's important to unplug and to sort of zoom out. I think it makes you a better reporter, honestly, if you're not just sort of like laser focused and in the trenches all the time, because there's life beyond what we're covering. So yeah, it's good to sort of take that breath, get my brain out of the news mode, maybe bake a loaf of bread or some cinnamon buns. I can't say I break out the tap shoes very often anymore, but that used to be a hobby of mine too, going to a dance class. So it's vitally important, I think, to find that balance.
As you mentioned, being in and around your whole life, you don't have any plans in the near future to do that. So for you, once you take the lavalier mic off and the lights turn off, the overhead lights turn off in the studio, what do you hope to leave behind from a professional aspect as a reporter?
Wow, that is a great question. I just want people to feel like that I told their stories and I told them well and I told them fairly. Anyone that I talk to, interview, I want them to feel like I respected them, that I really listened to them, and that I gave them a fair chance at saying whatever it is that they wanted to say. We talk a lot in this industry about how you meet people on their best day or their worst day.
Sure.
And I try to be cognizant of that a lot when I'm approaching my job. So yeah, I mean, gosh, when I think about finally leaving this job one day, like you mentioned, hopefully in retirement and not anytime soon, I just really hope that people look back and they say, she told stories well, she told them fairly, and she treated people with respect.
Well, I can certainly attest that as a viewer to your station, that is something you certainly have done. Before we enter today, again, I can't begin to say thank you, Kim, for doing this. It's been a great treat. I wanted to end on a little game called the One Word Challenge. So what entails with this is I'll throw out a few names of people, places, or things that have some connection to you, and you have to do your best to say a word or two or sentence, whatever you want, because you're Kim, you can do whatever you want. Whatever comes to mind when you hear that phrase. So if you're ready, I'll start.
Okay, so wait, what are the rules? Just one word is the ideal?
A word or a sentence or two words, whatever comes to mind.
Okay, I'm ready, Nolan.
First one, Rhode Island.
Love.
WPRI 12.
Legacy.
Hard work.
Imperative.
Success.
Optional.
Tad Nessie.
What a guy.
And certainly last but never least in this cosmic universe, Kim Kalunian.
All right.
I think a little bit better than just all right. Well, ma'am, I want to say thank you so much for doing this. This has been a great treat. I'm certainly honored that you took the time to do this. It means a lot.
Nolan, thank you so much for asking me to do this. You do great work. I hope you continue to have success with this show and whatever future endeavors that you have. And it was a real pleasure. You asked some great questions.
Well, as long if I get that okay from someone who does it for a living, gets paid to do it, then that's a-okay. Of course, you're busy with this. I know you had posted something on social media about something that's coming up that you'll be not Q&Aing, but you'll be the person speaking and conveying the conversation in terms of that, but also social media. Where can they find you?
Yeah, so at Kim Kalunian is my Twitter, or X, if that we're calling that these days. Kim Kalunian on Facebook. I think it's just Kim Kalunian on Instagram. So find me, send me a message or an email, kkalunian@wpri.com. I love to hear from folks, even if it's just to say hi.
Yeah. Well, if you enjoy this, because would be shocked, believe me, if you didn't, subscribe, comment, share all that fun jazz. Follow on Twitter, Nolan Car Night, Instagram, Nolan Car Night Show. In the words of Johnny Carson, the DNF Talk Show, certainly like this one, of course, I bid you all a heartfelt good night.